Recall that in the previous video, I drafted a pattern for this piece. I also transferred the patterns to fabric. This is a sewing tutorial for this gorgeous ankara lace dress. You're welcome to Kemafric. My name is Kemi Omorugbe. Now this was the point where I rounded up the previous video, where we transferred the pattern for the bust pad to the wording, and then we pressed on the wording on the fabric, fixed our fusible interfacing. So here we are. Now I'll be starting this process by sewing the panels for the front pieces together by 1/2 inch. So remember, I always say you should notch the bust point and under bust point. So you're going to align each of the panel with the other, make sure that the bust point meets at the same point, and I will be sewing these 2 or 3 pieces together by 1/2 inch. For the back pattern as well, I'll be sewing in my dart. So I already notched the position of the dart for both the main fabric and the lining. The width of the dart is just 1 inch and I made it 7 inches long. Here is my front piece, looking very lovely. Don't forget to notch, guys. Don't forget to notch. So this helps your seam relax better. And after this process, I went ahead to press open the seam allowance. You can see how cute it looks. It looks so cute. Now I'll be sewing the neckline of the lining and the main fabric together. At this point, I wasn't so sure of where the neckline should end, so I took my pattern again, just shifted it inward to remove the 1 inch side seam allowance so I can notch the exact point where my neckline should stop. Remember that a part of it is the armhole, right? So I'll be sewing the lining and the main fabric together by 1/2 inch. Guys, on the day I was recording this, there was no power supply and I had to make use of this, my lovely manual sewing machine. I love it. I enjoyed using it again. My mini vlogging light from Ulanzi helped a great deal. I was still able to record my video. You can see how bright it looks. Guys, will you believe that that was the only light I used for this? It's also very handy because you don't even need a stand for it. You just place it on top of your camera. You can also make use of this mini light with your mobile phone as well. I'll drop a link to the site where I purchased mine. Now I am done notching my seam allowance as usual, and I will be proceeding to top stitch on the lining, making sure that the seam allowance is towards the lining. So once that is done, this is what I have. So, and here is our back piece. Remember, we have sewn in our darts already. It's time for me to attach the back yoke, and we have our yoke here transferred from the pattern like I explained in the previous video. Now I'll be sewing the yoke onto the back piece by 1/2 inch. You have the option to just sew these 2 together first, then turn the seam allowance with your lining, or you can just do it this way by sandwiching the yoke in between the lining and the main fabric and just sew once by 1/2 inch, and you have your neat finishing. I used the first method I explained for this, while for the second one I went with the second method. Okay, so but when I'm doing this along the zip allowance, I like to leave like 1/4 inch out so that I can close up that seam. You don't have to do that. There's still an option to overlock it. So you can see what I did right there. I close up the seam allowance along the zip allowance. I don't know how to explain this better. So here we have our back piece. I did the same thing for the other side. Now it's time to place our yoke on the bodice, and I took the pattern and placed it on the lace fabric just so I can mark the exact front without seam allowance. Remember that this yoke has seam allowance and I just wanted to be accurate. So I marked it on the 2 pieces of the yoke, then placed that point on the other. That way I am sure that I'm on the right path. Okay, we like to be accurate. So this is what I have right here. Because the front yoke is not sew on type of yoke, it's a place on yoke. So this is exactly what I did. I just placed it on the bodice I have sewn already. Remember that I didn't close up the dart on the yoke, so we have a little excess along the side like so. So I am just arranging the yoke to be sure that it is centrally placed, and after doing that I'll go ahead to hold it down with pins, and we have our yoke settled. Okay, you're not sewing the yoke onto the bodies like we usually do. Now the next step is to sew the front and back piece together along the shoulder line. So I'm just going to place the right side of the back yoke onto the right side of the front yoke, and we'll sew by 1/2 inch. This is what we have right here, and next we have to make our neckline knit. Right, I decided to make use of the Ankara fabric, or the African print. I cut a strip on bias just to give me like a little stretch right there and to help it relax. So I'll be doing a procedure, or a process we call piping. What do you call this where you are? I know this as piping. Okay, so right side of the strip over the right side of the lace, I sew in my first 1/2 inch allowance, and you can see right here I am folding the strip twice in such a way that the allowance will be hidden. Now you can choose to top stitch, but I didn't top stitch. I only stitch along the original seam line, so that way the seam is hidden. Now I want to work on my sleeve. Remember that our sleeve is unique and it is exaggerated, and it has two pieces or two patterns to it. So now from here, from what I'm demonstrating, I want to pleat the lace part on the African print part, and I'll be doing this pleat and sewing by 1/2 inch. So having achieved that, this is what you have. So next I want to create another set of pleats. I want to pleat on the armhole, okay, of this of the main piece of the dress. Okay, I'm pleating the sleeve onto this and sewing by 1/2 inch. Am I struggling a little bit? I hope you understand. Here we go. Our ankara lace dress is coming together very nicely. Next we want to work on our skirt, but this is what we have so far, and I am not making use of a complete inseam finishing for this. Along the side I won't be hiding the seam allowances or anything like that. You have to ensure that the dart on the skirt aligns with what you have on the body. So go ahead and sew in your darts for the lining and for the main fabric separately. Here is mine, and now I want to sew the skirt and the bodice together. And for this piece I am turning the right side of the main fabric over the right side of the bodice, and I'll be sewing together by 1/2 inch. Now you can choose to sandwich the bodice between the main fabric of the skirt and the lining for the skirt, and you still have a closed seam allowance right there. Or you can go ahead and sew the main fabric first, then you turn it with the lining. Note that for the bodice you are treating the lining and the main fabric as a single piece. Now I did sew my main fabric onto the bodice first. You can see what I have. My dart aligns with what I have on the bodice, and so I'm placing the right side of the lining over the wrong side of the bodice, and I will go over my seam again. So at the end of the day, this is what I have. I also have a neat finishing on the inside part of that waist seam. So remember that our front skirt pattern comes in two pieces. We have the lace and the African print part of it. So I am going to be sewing the lace onto the main fabric and turning around with the lining. Okay, I do this a lot on most of my pieces just to make sure that the final look looks neat both on the inside and on the outside. So right there I used the lining to turn that seam, and I'll be sewing this three together by 1/2 inch. Now for the back, I did exactly the same, okay, more like sandwiching the bodies between the main fabric of the skirt and the lining to give the waist seam a neat finishing. So remember the tiny 1/4 of an inch that I left to turn the zip allowance part of things? I did the same thing for the skirt, just so I don't have to overlock the edge of the zip allowance or the side of the zip allowance. So let's go on with our sandwiching. So for this is what I have so far, and you can see how good it looks. Just like I explained earlier on, I'll be closing up the zipper allowance by 1/4 of an inch to have that neatness, okay? But before then, I need to turn the hem. If you watch the previous video, you notice that I said I added 2 inches extra to the length of the main fabric to give me that turn up effect. I also made the lining 3 inches shorter, 3 inches smaller, just so I can still retain the length I originally wanted. So this is what I have on my turn up right here. So after this, I went ahead to sew in the zipper allowance by 1/4 of an inch. So what it means is when I'm fixing my zip, I'm fixing it by 3/4 of an inch. We are almost done here. After closing up the zipper allowance to make it look neat with the lining, I will be fixing my zipper. Now, I think most of you know how to fix a zipper. If you think you need a tutorial on that, drop it in the comment section and I'll attend to it. So, well, this is what I have on my piece. Looks good. Now it's time to sew my side seam allowance, and I'm just placing the front part on the back part. I went ahead to sew my seam allowance by 1 inch. I cross-checked my measurements and also folded the sleeve hem allowance. Okay guys, this is what the final dress looks like. Perfect. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't. See you in the next video. Bye.